Why I'm skeptical of low-code. This is an article I saw by Nick Ciali. I'm skeptical of low-code. When I was doing some software consulting, I would get clients who had been drawn to low-code all the time for the promise of fast development time and low maintenance cost. The client ended up not being happy for one of a few reasons. The first reason is that they wanted truly custom functionality that the low-code solution could not handle. A lot of low-code solutions seem to hit about 80% of a company's requirement, but then there's the 20% that the tool cannot do out of the box. Low-code tool marketers are pretty good at convincing execs that the tool can knock out the remaining 20% with ease, usually just by saying the tool can knock out the other 20% with ease. The reality ends up being the remaining 20% requires significant and potentially impossible customization. Companies are then forced to choose, is the tool's out-of-the-box functionality close enough, or are we going to have to try and hack the tool up to make it fit our exact use case? This isn't an exact one-to-one, but I think about the XKCD bird skit all the time. When a user takes a photo, the app should check whether they're in a national park. Sure, easy GIS lookup, give me a few hours. And check whether the photo's of a bird. I'll need a research team in 5 years. In CS, it can be hard to explain the difference between the easy and the virtually impossible. The reason that is relevant here is that the execs probably don't code. So when a salesperson at another company that doesn't code claims that this other 20% is easy, and an exec who also doesn't code hears that, both assume it's true because they don't understand how complex those things are. It's difficult. Thankfully, there are engineers, at least here, to call that out. And I'm sure we're all familiar with this as coders, that getting the first 80 to 90% of a project is actually the easy part. And that last 10 to 20% is often where most of the difficulty is. That last 10% takes half or more of your time as an engineer. So having a tool that does that first 80, 90% might sound incredible, but you're not actually going to save that much money. So let's take a look at the other points this author made. Point 2, they implemented a bunch of custom functionality in a product-specific or even proprietary language, and now their pool of potential developer talent is tiny. Often, companies will opt to try to hack a low-code tool up to match 100% of its requirements. What they end up with is a bunch of custom code in a bespoke language that a very small number of people understand. Now, rather than recruiting from a large pool of ubiquitous open-source developers, the company has to find maintainers who are very specialized in this specific tool. If you want proof of this, Google search Webflow engineer. There are even YouTube channels with full-time people that do nothing but make videos about Webflow, which is an alternative way to build your homepage for your website. What? Yeah. There's a whole world of these low-code tool specialists that has to exist as these tools have gotten more and more popular. And as much as I love that these things have made dev more accessible, I do fear that the almost forced niching that they encourage has prevented a lot of people from breaking out and becoming more traditional developers. Like, I know people who'd be incredible traditional web or even full stack devs that early in their career got super shoehorned into something like Shopify, and now they're Shopify engineers instead of full stack engineers. So yeah, that's a very real problem with the proprietary nature of these tools. You end up having to hire specialists for those tools instead of engineers that can flex around and use different things. Point 3, upgrades to the low-code platform would break their custom implementations. This I've seen a lot of, where the platform makes an update and now the thing you were using before just stops working. Upgrading software without breaking things that interface with it is hard. Low-code tools have to do this with an arbitrary code, accomplishing use cases for which the low-code tool was never designed. This should be doable by having a strict API contract, but in practice, I've seen a lot of tools that just kind of let the custom code do all sorts of shenanigans under the hood. A good example of this would be something like Retool. I actually think they're a good example. Like, they do it relatively well from the little bit I've played with it, where it's a drag and drop interface for making a table or adding a button. But you can also use their methods of connecting different data sources like databases, S3, whatever random stuff you're using, and then write a little bit of JavaScript to link things together. It's nice where it is just JavaScript. They didn't invent their own language, but they did create a lot of those adapters to help you connect those things together. And getting that right took enough technical prowess that my CTO is one of their old support engineers. The stuff that they did there was really cool, and I think walked this line decently. But for every retool, there's 5 Salesforces that do this entirely wrong. So this is a good point to call out, but we should also highlight the few that get that part right. There's also Refine, which is an open source alternative to Retool. I will quickly confess I'm an investor, so despite my general disdain for low code, I found Refine to be exciting enough that I chose to invest in the company. And also, all their stuff is open source, so it's way more maintainable, way more standardized, and if they do make changes, theoretically, you can maintain an old version, which is really, really cool. I am pumped with what these guys are doing. I think they found a great balance of effectively building the layer between these things and letting you just write React when you need to make your own custom UI stuff. There are some cool things that are walking this no-code line that I'm excited about. But when your pitch is, we make it so non-engineers can engineer, that's when things tend to fall apart. And now for the final point, the underlying database structure was an absolute mess, especially after a bunch of incremental modifications. I'll give my anecdote here. And again, I want to be clear, this is about a sponsor. Clark's great to work with. I've had an overall incredible experience with them. But when it comes to getting all of your users so you can do things like a searchable lookup and another thing like Retool, which funny enough, we built so we can look up users and make changes to their setup for their apps. So if I want to grant someone more storage on upload thing, I can. Getting all of the user IDs and all of the usernames for that search into Retool required us just going through their endpoint, exhausting all of the values and storing them in order to make a search interface. Absolute chaos, because they weren't expecting you to need a searchable input on their API. They just give you paginated data. So we dumped all that data into literally local storage so we can search it. And when you open our Retool page, you have to let it sit for 30 seconds to 2 minutes as it fetches all of the user IDs so that we can sort it in that way. Chaos, but also somewhat common once you start linking these low-code and no-code tools together. And that's just one of the things I and my team have recently experienced with this. And we actually avoid the low-code tools. So God forbid you're using something like Webflow combined with something like Firebase, and now you need to update something on your homepage when that data changes. It's a mess. This author had plenty to say here too. I have seen companies use low-code tools for processing where precise analytics of the underlying data is critical. That scares me. I wouldn't even use JavaScript for data processing that was critical. I don't even want to think about low-code tools that do that for you. But then, when viewing the underlying data model, coming to find that it's inscrutable. What does user attribute 47 mean? Oh God, I've seen some shit with these generic data places. Once your database gets generic, you end up with chaos like this. I moved a field from page 1 to page 2 of the application, and now the data's in separate fields. That's another fun one. When you drag and drop things in your low-code UI, if someone else is using an API to get that same data, it's possible that making UI changes the shape of the data that you're relying on elsewhere. Terrifying. This is not a low-code bad article, but rather a recommendation to treat these tools with a healthy amount of skepticism. Anecdotally, I have heard they can work great for the right use cases, but empirically, I've found that they have a lot of gotchas. I hope this video helps you understand that I almost entirely agree. There are good use cases for low-code, but if you're not careful about how you apply it, you might end up in more hell than you've saved yourself. Do you use any low-code tools? Let me know in the comments which ones you like and don't like and what your experience has been overall. Appreciate you all the time. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace, nerds.